We're talking about debugging during development time, not during runtime. We'll talk later about what to do about troubleshooting things that happen during runtime, but for this, we're talking just about development environment. There's several things that can happen. First of all, you can check and see the number of rows that have come through in the data flow path. So you can look in the data flow tab and check and see how many rows are coming from one task to another. And often that will be a red flag. Wait a minute, where did all these rows go, or where are they all coming from? So we can also look at the output window. I'll show that to you in a little bit. And the progress/execution results window. We've seen that a couple of times already. There's something wrong, we go look at the progress window. And I don't remember if I mentioned this before, but while the package is running, it's called progress window or tab. Well, after it's finished, the debugging is completed, it's called the execution results. It's the same thing, it just changes names. So we can look in there. We also have the ability to step through our packages step by step, event by event. And we do that by creating something called a breakpoint. And that when the breakpoint is reached, then it pauses, it doesn't stop execution. All the variable values, all of that state information is there. We can inspect it and start answering questions like, how did I get to this point? Why is it doing that? Kind of a thing. And then we also can take a look at the actual data. We can enable something called a grid viewer so that we can actually look at the real data, not just how many rows are coming, but the rows themselves. You can even copy it to a spreadsheet or some other source or location and look at the data and make sure that it's really coming through the right way. Now, during production, after we've finished this, we pushed it out and deployed it, and we're running it in a production environment. We have other things we can do. We can do logging, and we can create dump files, but really logging, and that we'll talk about logging later in this module, is what you're really going to be looking for to help you with that. But for now, let's just focus on debugging during development time. So when a package executes, it runs through a series of events. You may have noticed some of them. There are events for on error. So if an error occurs, or pre-execute, it's an event that occurs immediately before the package starts executing or the task starts executing. So you can check how things are before it executes a particular task, and then there's a corresponding post-execute. You can see what the variables are or whatever you want to look at after the event occurs. So you can do both. So breakpoints are simply, as I mentioned, ways to stop or pause the execution of a task or a package while you examine some things. Look at it, make sure it's right, and then you can continue on. You can set those breakpoints so that they trigger the first time an event occurs, or every time it occurs, or every third time it occurs, or the fifth and larger times. It's very, very flexible. I'll show those to you and show you how to set a breakpoint and how to set them to run at different points. We also have a bunch of windows. Two are really worth noticing. One is called the Locales window, and you may or may not have seen it and paid attention to it, but the Locales window is visible while the package is running in debug mode, and it displays for you all of the variables that are currently in scope and what their values are. If a variable is not in scope, it won't show up in the Locales window. And that's really helpful, but sometimes I want to know not just the values of variables that are not in scope, but I want to know the condition of variables that are not in scope. For that, we have a watch window. And we can look in the watch window and add variables to the watch windows so that it pops up, and even though it's out of scope, it shows me that it has some value or it doesn't. So Locales window are variables that are in scope and parameters, and watch window is variables or parameters, whether they're in scope or not. And then we can also have something called data viewers. Data viewers are what I was talking about earlier. You can actually look at the data. So in the data flow tab, you can add a data grid viewer to any of the data flow paths. And then as it runs, it encounters that grid viewer, it pops up, it pauses execution just like a breakpoint would. It pops up that, it looks kind of like a mini spreadsheet worth of the data. You can scroll around in there, and you can copy that data and paste it into something else. Usually I use Excel, but whatever. Paste it into anywhere else and get a full look at that data to find out what's going on.